Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Mata. I'm the Associate Director of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. Welcome to our film series this semester on the Great War on Film. As you all know, this is the centenary of the First World War. About 100 years ago this evening, the French and the British and the Germans were slogging it out north of the Marne, so around the River Aisne, where the Germans had dug in about 40 miles from the French line, and for the first time, for them at least, they dug what they were told were called trenches. And so trench warfare started right around this time, about 100 years ago. So it is now turning into a brutal slog, as we know, and had formative, devastating effects for the entire century. One of the events of the 20th century that shaped the entire century, shaped the globe. So during this semester, we have at the Institute not only a film series here, but we have also a series of lectures that you're all welcome to attend. They're all public lectures held in the Annenberg Auditorium in the Snipe Museum of Art. These lectures are all designed to take on, how can I put this, not the usual topics that one talks about when you talk about the First World War, but the topics that historical research is starting to address more carefully, topics that are new. For example, from Rhodes College, we're going to have shortly Tate Keller, a professor of history, who's interested in the environmental history of the war. So what does the war look like, for example, if we pay attention to energy production? What did energy production look like in the Germans, on the German side? What did it look like? So there are all kinds of other interesting questions that are being raised about the war, and we've got the researchers who are going to shed all of that light for us. We also have a wonderfully robust series of films about the First World War. So if you really want to indulge, there must be, Ted, how many films are there?
12.
12 or more? 12. Thank you. 12 films, all carefully chosen, some of the best films and most interesting films that you could see about the war. So not only the Nanovic series, but Ted has also put together here at DPAC a wonderful additional series. I think the next film will be a Charlie Chaplin film.
Correct.
Yeah. So please avail yourself of all these opportunities. This is a great way to understand the war better and to really reflect on it at this time. To help us reflect on this film, however, we have got a wonderful scholar here at Notre Dame named Olivier Morel, who is a filmmaker himself. He's an assistant professor of Romance literature and languages, French mainly, but has wide-ranging interests and is also the associate director of the Ph.D. in literature program here. So Olivier, who is no stranger to film or to all of this history, is going to introduce Stanley Kubrick tonight. Stanley Kubrick's film tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Ted Barron, for organizing this. Thank you to the Nanovic Institute. Adieu la vie, adieu la mort, adieu toutes les femmes. C'est bien fini, c'est pour toujours de cette guerre infâme. C'est à Craonne qu'il faut mourir, qu'il faut laisser sa peau, car nous sommes tous condamnés, nous sommes des sacrifiés. And it reads, goodbye to life, goodbye to love, goodbye to all the women. It's all over now. We've had it for good with this awful war. It's in Crown up on the plateau that we are leaving our hides because we've been all sentenced to die. We are the ones that they are sacrificing. This is the Chanson de Craonne, the Craonne song that was written by soldiers in the trenches in 1917. And obviously this is a personal memory that I'm sharing with you while inflicting this first part of the Chanson de Craonne in French. Obviously, I know the song, but it doesn't mean that I was a soldier in the trenches of the First World War. It is rather that on July 14, 1997, I remember that as if it had been this afternoon, I knocked on Marius Estrata's door. Marius lived in the old house where he was born on September 10, 1897. We have spent a whole afternoon together. I recorded our conversation for hours, and the sun was red over the Rhone River when I left his kitchen. This was the first of a long series of free, open, enjoyable, sometimes frightening, funny, and also gripping discussions that I had with him. We became close friends. I came back always with my tape recorder, and every time when we stopped, he and I had the feeling that we had said everything. But when I came back, his memory had worked, and often during his sleep. And his 80-year-old recollections of the war, even some memories that he had blocked since then, were pouring out of his mind at the extremity of his life. I was in my 20s, he was almost 100 years old. It was July in Caumont-sur-Durance, this little village on the Rhone River near Avignon, in the south of France. The smell of the pines, the pine trees, the lavender, the haunting sound of the seagull, the insects, Like his father, grandfathers, great-grandfathers, and so on, as far as he could go back in the family history, Marius and his family had been impoverished peasants, growing a bit of everything, as he puts it, and selling these fruits and vegetables on the farmers' markets of Avignon and Marseille. When the war broke in 1914, his older brother, Jules, was called. Marius, whose grandfather had dreadful memories of the French-Prussian War, told about his mother's inability to overcome the death of Jules. That killed my mother, he said. Jules Estrata, Marius's brother, died pulverized, that's Marius's word, by a shell, and his remains were never found. Marius is sent to the Western Front in 1916. He gets wounded, recovers, and is sent back to the front. In the meantime, he also gets hopeless and depressed. In 1917, that's 80 years before I met Marius, he takes part in the disastrous, badly prepared, dreadful and deadly battle known as the Battle of the Chemin des Dames, where he learned this song and maybe was part of the soldiers who wrote the lyrics. I remember Marius singing the Chanson de Craonne, whispering at the end of the song, "We never sung this song in front of the officers," he said. And he cried. That was our third or fourth, I don't remember exactly well, conversation. So when I came back after that moment, which was a turning point in our conversations, he only wanted to talk about the Chemin des Dames. He sings the song again, the entire song this time, and it is very long. And suddenly, he looks at me and asks me to turn off the tape recorder, the microphone, which I did. Marius then is whispering. He tells me that he and his comrades had started to rebel against the command. He was among the mutinies of the Nivelles attacks. That's what I was realizing at this moment. And randomly, some of his friends were taken from the ranks, prosecuted in less than an afternoon probably, and sentenced. He saw the commanding officers remove their military insignia and buttons. He was convinced himself, but was not convinced himself, but was sent to one of the most dangerous areas of the Chemin des Dames, where he got badly wounded again. Marius is a banal story of the First World War. Thousands of soldiers of this war have been condemned to death by the military courts, and a bit more than 600 of them were executed to make an example, pour l'exemple, right? For various motives, many were totally made up by the command, the investigators, or the court. Stanley Kubrick's film, a young Kubrick, counts among the very first in 1957 to bring these stories to the big screens. And by that he really sets a tradition in World War I movies in which we could name many examples, like Johnny Got His Gun, made by Donald Trumbo in '71, or The Trench, more recently by William Boyd. So this film is an adaptation of a novel by Humphrey Cobb, and it takes its main inspiration from several events of the war that could be quite similar to the ones in which Marius Estrata was involved. One of those events, and I'm sorry I'm going to get into details here because this is one of those events known as the Soin Corporals trial that started on March 10, 1915, that serves as the main source of inspiration for the film that we are going to watch this evening. So on March 10, 1915, under withering machine gun fire and with French artillery carelessly dropping shells just in front of their own lines, the 21st Company of the 336th Infantry Regiment, exhausted and already decimated by combat, was ordered over the trench at dawn. Frantic to force to advance, the French commander ordered artillery to drive the troops ahead by shelling his own trenches, an order that artillerists refused to carry out unless someone put it in writing. In that slaughterhouse of trench warfare, insubordination in the ranks met stern reprisals. Generals with no strategy but to make mincemeat of their countrymen could not well abide the meat's reluctance to be minced. Examples must be made, especially inasmuch as the impracticality of executing entire companies impressed even the brass. So on March 16, 1915, six corporals and 18 soldiers of the intransigent company faced military trial in the Suippes town hall. The 4 condemned men were shot the next day and buried under dishonorable black crosses. These 4 French corporals were shot at a farm for refusing to advance out of their trenches through the carnage of the First World War, no man's land. Corporal Théophile Maupas, I want to name them, Corporal Théophile Maupas, Louis Le Foulon, Louis Girard and Lucien Lechat were shot in order to make an example. These executions, as with many of the others carried out across Europe, this is not specific to the French army, in those years, sparked a long campaign for posthumous exoneration, in this case led by Maupas's widow. Maupas was a 40-year-old teacher. In 1934, that's 20 years after the beginning of the war, a French panel did exonerate them, awarding the surviving widows a symbolic 1 franc apiece. At the end of our conversation, probably in the spring of 1998, one of our last conversations, I asked Marius Estrata, who became my friend, why he wanted me to turn off the microphone a few months ago. Why, he asked? But, well, of course, because I do not want them to know. Them? Them was the officers, the police, the government, according to Marius. But I reminded Marius that he had lived over a century, and they were probably all dead. So he scratched his head and said, well, throughout my life I thought that they would find us one day and prosecute us again and humiliate us in front of our families and friends. And I knew that no one would understand what we had been through before we protested. We just did not want to die in vain, like in the song. So it was 97, 98, and then on November 19 1998, the French Prime Minister of the time, Lionel Jospin, declared in Craonne on the plateau where Marius had fought and was wounded, that those who had been shot to make an example, victims of a rigorous discipline that was subsequent to the ruthlessness of combats, should be readmitted in collective national memory. There was 80 years after no consensus about that. At that time, the leader of the Conservative Party, Nicolas Sarkozy, who then became the French president, declared, I quote, that shedding a favorable light on those who have been shot this way because they mutinied when others sacrificed themselves was not the best example to give to the newer generations and the nation. Well, this atmosphere might explain why it took so long until Path of Glory, this masterpiece, to finally make it to the French screens. At the time when the movie was released, the French were very reluctant, to a point that the film was not widely distributed as the producer and distributors had been intimidated by the French authorities. Marius, my friend Marius, this is Marius Estrada, died on December 23, 2003 at the honorable age of 106. That is off the record now, what I want to say. And I hope, Marius, and I'm looking at him here, that you do not mind that I shared your untold secret story of rebellion with my friends at Notre Dame tonight. Thank you.